So welcome to the webinar. I hope everyone's doing well today and hanging in there as we approach the end of the semester. So my name is Kelsey. I am one of the doctoral interns in the Counseling Center here at Texas State. And today for our webinar, we're going to be talking about intrusive thoughts, the thoughts that won't go away. So I'm going to provide all sorts of information about what intrusive thoughts are. I'm going to help y'all get a sense that, or hopefully by the end, you'll have a sense that they're not uncommon, that there are various ways that we can manage when these distressing or uncomfortable thoughts pop up for us, and that they're very, very normal, that it doesn't have to mean what it might feel like they mean when intrusive thoughts kind of enter our life or enter our day. So just a couple of things, or really just one thing to keep in mind as we move ahead is that if you have any questions, please direct those to the Q&A box rather than the chat box. That just helps it be a little bit more efficient, easier for us to attend to your questions on our end. So thank you so much ahead of time for doing that. All right, so let's get started. So what is an intrusive thought? So two perspectives here, one from the National Institute of Mental Health and another from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. So intrusive thoughts are often unwanted thoughts that just kind of pop up out of the blue. It can feel like they come out of nowhere. They can feel like different from thoughts that you're trying to think, so to speak, or thoughts that you want to be thinking or things that you're actively thinking about. They can just be thoughts that kind of feel like they just dropped into your mind out of nowhere. Sometimes they can be disturbing, or they can be unpleasant, or they can make us feel really uncomfortable. And sometimes they can be really explicit. So it can be material that we might feel really uncomfortable like talking about, and it can stop us from really seeking help or support because it might feel like it incites shame or embarrassment to tell people that we've had intrusive thoughts if the content is more disturbing or explicit. Intrusive thoughts are involuntary, and they have no bearing on reality, and they don't accurately reflect a person's true desires or feelings. People typically don't act on intrusive thoughts. Sometimes people might react to them, and they might change their behavior or try to do things to kind of push away or avoid the thoughts. But typically, if we have an intrusive thought about like something disturbing, we have no desire or intent to act on these thoughts. Often we find those thoughts shocking or unacceptable, which can again kind of lead to some feelings of shame or embarrassment about having those thoughts. And I'll talk about lots of examples later. So I'm being really general and kind of vague now, but as I provide examples, it might get a little bit more clear what I mean by explicit or disturbing. Intrusive thoughts can also be persistent, and they can really cause a lot of distress. It can be really uncomfortable having thoughts that maybe don't feel like thoughts that you want to be thinking, or thoughts that reflect things that you would never actually want to do. Often, because they're uncomfortable or disturbing, we try really hard to get rid of them by like avoiding thinking about them or trying to kind of think our way out of them. But as we'll talk about later on, sometimes that can actually really just kind of fuel them. The more we resist them, the more persistent they can become, or the longer they can linger. So we'll talk about later lots of different strategies that you can use if you notice intrusive thoughts starting to pop into your mind more often. Intrusive thoughts are often triggered by stress or anxiety. So I'm sure y'all can imagine over the last few years where there's been really an increase in stress in people's lives because of the pandemic and various things that have been happening in the world. If we're all more stressed out or if we're all more anxious, we can notice more intrusive thoughts popping into our mind. So don't be surprised if during a really stressful day, you start to notice having more intrusive thoughts. And those thoughts could be things where it's like, well, this is that same old intrusive thought that I always have when I'm stressed out, or they can be new thoughts, things that you haven't like noticed before popping into your mind that are causing you distress or anxiety. Intrusive thoughts can also really be triggered or worsened by biological factors, one of which is hormonal changes. So if you're experiencing some kind of hormonal change through menstruation cycle, through taking different types of hormones or reducing certain types of hormones in your body, you can notice a change in intrusive thoughts, whether how frequent or intense they pop up, or even just kind of the presence of them if they show up at all. So again, just want to reiterate that having intrusive thoughts, they can really make us feel shame and they can stop us from seeking support. So I'm hoping that some of the information that I provide you today will be kind of freeing and help folks kind of see that these types of thoughts are typically very, very, very normal, even if they make us feel embarrassed that we're having them, or if we feel like, disturbed by them. So just to start to summarize, nearly everyone has had an intrusive thought from time to time. So they're really thought to pop up for at least 6 million Americans. And this is just one source. So you'll probably find sources that show a little bit less and maybe sources that show a little bit more as well. And I've got all my citations in the end if you want to look at that specifically. But so very, very common, very normal. They can range from random images or thoughts, things that just kind of pop up, to thoughts that are disturbing or violent. They don't represent a secret desire to do the thing that pops into your mind. And I think this is what can be really distressing for people, is we can have an intrusive thought about something happening and our reaction can be like, oh my gosh, does that mean I want to do that? Or does that mean I'm a bad person? And they don't. If you don't want to do something, but you have a thought about it, that doesn't mean that you secretly want to do it. Sometimes we just have weird thoughts because that's what our brains do. So they're typically very harmless. Really what we're worried about is if they cause you distress or not, if they make you feel anxious or ashamed, or if they start to get in the way of you being able to live your life day to day, engage in school or work or relationships, or do the things that you want to do with your time. They can be linked, though, to depressed mood, disordered eating, anxiety. They're very common with anxiety and OCD, and even like trauma responses or responses to high stress events. So if you have a sense that maybe one of those things might be going on in tandem with intrusive thoughts, or intrusive thoughts are maybe a bit of an indicator that something could be going on under the surface, I would just encourage you to reach out for some support, and I'll talk about some resources for that later on. And really, I know it can be hard to discern, well, I hear you saying they're normal, but they can also be linked to other, which are also normal, like mental health concerns like depression and anxiety. Sometimes it can be tough to kind of disentangle what's going on there. So I would just encourage you to notice, how often is it happening? How much distress is it causing you? Is it really getting in the way of you being able to, feel generally okay, most of the time, day to day? And if that's the case, if it's really getting in the way and causing you a lot of distress, that might be a good time to reach out for some extra support and exploration. So how do we identify them? So we're just going to continue to go a little bit deeper into what these look like and some common examples and ways to point out when they're happening for yourself. So intrusive thoughts tend to be kind of unusual for you. It can feel like, oh, this isn't something that I want to think, or this isn't something that I would usually think, or this doesn't really fit with who I am or what I value or how I live my life. So it can almost feel like it's not quite your thought, like it just kind of popped up there from somewhere else. If the thought is bothersome or you feel really repelled by it, if it feels like not a thought that you want to be having, or it grosses you out or makes you feel weird, or you want to really avoid it, it feels like something that you don't want in your head at all, that can be a thought that thought might be intrusive. Or that can be a sign that thought might be intrusive. Intrusive thoughts are also very characteristically hard to control. So if you feel like there's this thought and it just keeps coming back and it just keeps coming back and it feels like it won't leave you alone and it feels like there's nothing you can do about it, it just keeps kind of worming its way back into your mind, that might be an indicator that thought is now intrusive. some common types of intrusive thoughts. So there's quite a few slides on this. So you'll be able to see a number of examples, a number of different ways that this shows up for people. So one example is that we can tend to have intrusive thoughts about relationships. So intrusive thoughts tend to anchor to some of the things that are the most important to us, which is part of what makes them so distressing. And relationships are something that tend to be very, very important for people. So we can have intrusive worries or thoughts about a specific relationship or about relationships in general. So examples of some relationship-related intrusive thoughts would be analyzing the strength of your feelings for a partner kind of obsessively, like really worrying about how do I feel about this person? How do I know how I feel about this person? And feeling that something's wrong and that you have to really analyze your feelings for that partner. Constantly seeking reassurance from a partner can be a way that this shows up as well. Although there are lots of other reasons we could seek reassurance from a partner too. So just because you seek reassurance from a partner doesn't mean it's an intrusive thought, but it kind of could be. This is one way that this can show up, feeling like you have to keep asking kind of maybe the same question or series of questions to get a sense of relief or to get an idea about what's going on. Doubts regarding like fidelity or honesty, having intrusive thoughts like, oh, did I lie to this person? Am I a bad partner? Was this thing that I did cheating? And having a lot of thoughts wondering about like your behavior in the relationship, even if part of you knows I didn't do anything wrong, continuing to have thoughts that make you question if you did something wrong or not, and having a hard time like actually believing yourself that you didn't do anything wrong. And then unfounded doubts regarding sexual orientation. So feeling like you have a lot of thoughts that come up, questioning like, am I really straight? Am I really gay? Am I really queer? Even if you know the answer to that question for yourself, having a lot of intrusive thoughts of questioning or worrying about it, even if it doesn't really fit with what you really might know about yourself. A person can also experience intrusive thoughts about their religion. So for example, really intrusively worrying that God may not forgive them or will send them to hell. And I'm specifically like in this slide, like you'll see like references to God, but you could really fit this with any kind of religious or spiritual view that you have. Really, it's the idea like, are you thinking intrusively about it? Is it causing you a lot of distress? Experiencing persistent negative thoughts in like religious or spiritual spaces or places, and having kind of a strong internal reaction and having thoughts that tend to come up and not go away. Repeating certain prayers or certain words or certain passages or certain things continually, feeling like you have to kind of repeat certain things in order to not have something kind of bad happen, or having like an intrusive sense that you have to do that. Persistent fears of losing touch with like your beliefs or with something spiritually important for you or with God or whatever kind of your religion or spiritual orientation informs you that you would want to be connected with. Having intrusive thoughts and analyzing, my faith or my beliefs or my connection to something in a way, again, that doesn't feel like it really fits with what you know or who you are. This is a very common one, and it might be the most shame-invoking one for folks. So it's natural to have thoughts about sex and sexuality and sexual behavior, and intrusive thoughts can really anchor to thoughts about sexuality. Intrusive sexual thoughts tend to be focused on fears that we might have. So fear of like being sexually attracted to infants or children, even if we know that's not true for us, it can feel scary to have a thought like that. Fear of being attracted to family members, fears regarding our own sexual orientation. And when we have thoughts like that, understandably, it can make us very uncomfortable. We can feel very disturbed. We can feel shocked by a thought that we have. And we might then consequently try to fixate or push that thought away because we're like, oh, I don't want to have this thought. This isn't how I really think or how I feel. This thought just popped up and I want it to go away because it makes me really uncomfortable. it's really important to separate that, like those thoughts that we have, in particular in areas like sex and sexuality, where the thoughts we have might really make us feel disturbed or uncomfortable. It's important to separate these thoughts from our true selves. If the thought feels unwanted, if it feels disturbing, if it feels incongruent with our true desires or values, then it's probably intrusive. And we really don't need to read much more into it than that. It's just our brain doing its thing. And it sometimes does weird things. And these thoughts will pass in time. But it's so important too for me to honor that, if you have thoughts like this, or thoughts of like wanting to harm yourself or someone else, really like paying attention, like, do you want to act on it, or is it just a thought? If you feel like, I do want to act on a thought of hurting someone, I am going to plan on acting on this thought, it's important to contact a crisis line. You can also call 911 or go to a local emergency room. But like I mentioned earlier, intrusive thoughts are really common. And if you don't want to act on it, then it probably is intrusive. And that doesn't mean that you have to worry about, if you're a bad person. But it is important to know, when it's time to reach out if you're feeling like you're going to act on a thought like that. But intrusive thoughts about sex and sexuality are super common, and probably one of the ones that folks are the most uncomfortable reaching out about, because it can feel kind of taboo or really shame-provoking. Some other common types of intrusive thoughts. So they can also have kind of violent or dark themes. So kind of continuing on from that prior slide. So thoughts of harming loved ones or children, or harming yourself, or killing someone else, or poisoning someone else, and having that thought come up but not wanting to act on it. And you don't even want that thought in your head, much less wanting to act on it. So they'll pass in time. But again, if you find yourself wanting or planning to act on aggressive thoughts of harming yourself or someone else, contact a crisis line. Here are some crisis support options here. You can also find support on our website. We're one of these numbers here. We offer 24-hour crisis support. If you call during business hours, we'll get you scheduled to meet with someone immediately for crisis-related support, typically during the same day. If you call after hours or on the weekends, you will get our voice message, but if you press 2, you'll get connected to a mental health provider. So there's resources, but just know, like, often intrusive thoughts can contain like aggressive or violent content. That doesn't mean you want to act on it. A really common one that I hear all the time, that I've also experienced just as a human in the world, is if you've ever been standing on like at a really high place, like on top of a building, or if you were hiking and you were on top of like a mountain or a cliff or something, and you had the thought pop up like, what if I were to jump? That can be an example of an intrusive thought of harming yourself. It's not that you wanted to act on, and in this exemplar that I'm providing, it's not that I wanted to act on that thought. I had no intention or desire to jump, but my brain gave me the thought, but what if I did? And it was uncomfortable and scary, and I didn't like it. But it was just an intrusive thought, and it didn't actually have any effect on my life or bearing on reality. Another common one is people thinking when they're driving, like, what if I crashed my car? No desire or, intention to act on that thought. It's just an intrusive thought. All right, negative thoughts. So sometimes, especially if we're under a lot of stress, or if there's something really challenging going on in our life, we can have intrusive thoughts about ourselves, like calling ourselves names, feeling that we're not good enough, or having intrusive thoughts about how bad we are, or whatever kind of critical, judgmental thought that we're having about ourselves. They can be really intrusive, and we can get kind of stuck on them. These thoughts typically fade as our stress level goes down, as we feel more relaxed, as whatever situation or challenge that we're in resolves. But sometimes they can stick around, and it can be helpful to get some external support from maybe a therapist or a friend, even if that feels like the right thing for you. So if you continue to notice yourself getting fixated on negative thoughts about yourself, I would just encourage you to reach out for some support. Find a space to be able to process through what those thoughts are, where they might be coming from. If they're intrusive, practicing some strategies to manage them. And if they're related to something else, just having a space to get underneath what's going on and see what you could change that might be more helpful. Okay, bizarre, weird, or paranoid thoughts. So for example, feeling fearful of having a disease with no basis to support that. So having intrusive thoughts about being sick or having contracted some kind of illness when that doesn't really fit with what you know about reality or what you know about your life experiences. Having intrusive thoughts about ruining your luck, like if you do or don't do something, or superstitions can kind of fit into this sometimes if it really feels like, oh, this doesn't fit with what I really believe. Or fear that you may do something inappropriate or embarrassing. So a really common example of an intrusive thought related to doing something inappropriate or embarrassing is that, let's say you're like sitting in a movie theater and the lights just went out and it's really quiet, the movie hasn't started yet, and you have the thought like, oh, what if I were to yell right now? Or what if I were to yell like a bad word? Or what if I were to say something uncontrollably? That can be an example of an intrusive thought of doing something embarrassing. Again, you don't want to yell randomly in the theater, in this situation at least, but your brain's like, oh, what if I did this? And it can be uncomfortable. We can feel anxious, like, oh my God, why did I think that? Am I really going to do that? I don't want to embarrass myself. Again, just a thought that will come and then it will go. So most of the time they have no meaning or relevance for your life. But again, if they last for a long time, or if you keep having episodes of them, or if you feel like it's getting harder to discern what, if what you're afraid of is real, or if you're having thoughts that like maybe feel like new or different, like if you feel fearful of people in a different way, or if you're worried about, people planning to harm you, or if you begin to have thoughts that like, you feel like people can really like read your mind in a very real way, or that people can hear your thoughts or something. If you start to have thoughts that feel intrusive, but that also feel really, really like different or unusual for you, or really violate like your knowledge of reality, be sure to reach out and bring that up with someone so you have a space to get a sense of what's going on. So let's talk about some myths about intrusive thoughts. And some of these, or one of these too, I've talked about quite a lot. And it's really because I want to really hit that home. I want that really to land with everyone. So when we have intrusive thoughts, it means we want to act on these. That's not true. That's totally a myth. And it's usually a myth that we tell ourselves because we're afraid of what it may or may not mean about us. So those experiencing intrusive thoughts typically work really hard to make them go away, and they don't want to act on them. The thoughts are at odds typically with the person who's experiencing them. They don't mean we secretly want to do something if we don't feel we want to do it. Yeah, we might have thoughts about things we want to do, but that's not an intrusive thought. That's just you thinking about something you want to do. So if you don't want to do it, trust that. I don't want to do it. This was just an intrusive thought. The more we fight them, the stickier they can become. So we're going to talk about some different coping strategies for if these thoughts start to enter our lives. Another myth is that all thoughts are worth examining. That's just not true. Not all of our thoughts have really significant meaning. We are not obliged to see every thought as a sign or as a warning of something. Despite how our thoughts can make us feel sometimes, they don't always carry true meaning or desire. Our brains are thought machines. They exist, at least in part, to think, to feed us lots of different thoughts and to respond to things in our world and to respond to things inside of us. And sometimes the stuff that our brain does is just kind of random. Sometimes it just feeds us stuff that isn't always super helpful. So trust that if you have thoughts that are not helpful, are not indicative of you or what you really want, you don't have to work really hard to try to figure out like, why is this happening? What's underneath this? Because the answer might be, it was just your brain doing what brains do. So what can I do? Let's say that you're noticing intrusive thoughts. The first step that you can do is really identify them. And that's really what we've talked about so far is what is this? And how can I tell if this is what's happening for me? So notice when it's happening and label them for what you think they are. And if you aren't sure if that's what it is, go seek some support. Go talk to a therapist, go talk to a primary care provider or a psychiatrist and kind of talk through, hey, I think I'm having some intrusive thoughts, but I'm not really sure. So once you get some confidence that this is what's going on, don't hesitate to label it. That can be really empowering to be able to put language to these thoughts. There's some really interesting research that because our brains are very well suited to language, they're like language machines. When we can assign a label to something, it can really help us process it and regulate it a little bit better. So when you notice those thoughts, point it out, say, oh, this is an intrusive thought. I can't control it, and it doesn't define me in any way. You can remind yourself that thoughts are not always facts or truth. They can simply be wild snippets of our brain doing its thing. You can let these thoughts run their course instead of frantically attempting to control them or push them away or to change your behavior in response to them. Or to, for example, if you have intrusive thoughts about us, about worrying about being attracted to a family member or something, you might start to avoid that family member because it can make you feel like, oh, but I've had these intrusive thoughts about them. Don't let intrusive thoughts change your behavior. That's just going to give those thoughts a lot more power. You can talk to a therapist about how to do that. I would encourage you to do that if you need to. But we want to just let them run their course instead of trying to control or interact with them too much. Accept that they will inevitably pass, even if it feels like they won't. They always do. It's impossible for our brain to do one thing forever. Eventually, they will go away. They might come back at a later time. I want to honor that can be true, but the more we get used to not interacting with them and coping with them in a bit of a different way, it does get a lot easier and a lot more comfortable over time, especially if you're in a place in your life where you're lower stress, you're lower anxiety, you're more relaxed. It can feel like an intrusive thought that caused you a lot of distress at one time is nothing, super easy to manage. So have hope, stay encouraged. It can get easier and they always go away. Give yourself some time for the thoughts to fade, distract yourself, use some of these strategies that we're going to talk about soon. Give yourself permission to go about your daily life. The thoughts aren't you, this isn't you intentionally having these thoughts. So there's no reason to change or shape your life around them. You do you go out and do what's meaningful and enjoyable for you, even if you're carrying some intrusive thoughts with you while you do it. And don't be surprised if they come back, like I was saying. Just be ready, be knowledgeable, have your label ready so you can say, oh, this is an intrusive thought, and be really compassionate with yourself because it's really, really common and it happens to most of us at one point or another. What are some other things that I can do? So really seek to manage your stress. So take good care of your mental health. Really protect time for relaxation. It's not enough to just kind of want to relax or to plan to relax. You've really got to protect that time. And if you needed permission to do that, I'm giving that to you right now. Go ahead and try to protect some time throughout your week as you can, even if it's just like a couple minutes to do something that feels good for you. Really see if you can get kind of that stress level down a little bit. And that should help with some of the intrusive thoughts if you're noticing them. Learn some anxiety management strategies. This is something that you can totally do in therapy. There's so many resources out there in the world, and a lot of, well, not a lot, some of them are on our website. So feel free to check out the Counseling Center website under the self-help resources. There are other webinars about anxiety. There's the therapy assistance online that you can access with your Texas State login information. There's some great skill development modules in therapy assistance online, TAO, where you can just find some ways to manage anxiety, which in turn could help with taking the edge off of some of the intrusive thoughts. Consider beginning a mindfulness practice. And this image on the left, The Mindful 20-something, is one of my favorite books about mindfulness. So I've read it. I can totally vet it. It's a great book. And it's focused on young adults, so typically folks in their 20s. So there's a lot of consideration of like, you've got a busy lifestyle, you've got a lot going on, relationships are important, it's hard to find the time. And so I think this book does a really, really nice job of finding, bite-sized kind of manageable ways to do mindfulness. I know that there are like PDF versions of this out there. Like if you've got like an e-reader or something, I bet you could find it on Audible if you wanted to do an audiobook instead. It might be available at the Texas State or the Hayes Community Library. I can't say that for certain, but I would just encourage you to look for it if you're interested in a mindfulness practice. There's a lot of research that's helpful with anxiety and intrusive thoughts. And then practice. So practice ways to manage intrusive thoughts. So whenever one pops up, maybe you can see it as an opportunity. Oh, I can practice like reacting to an intrusive thought. We're going to talk specifically about cognitive diffusion as a way to practice. So what is cognitive diffusion? It's really just a super jargony term for talking about how we can create just a little bit of space between ourselves and unhelpful thoughts or feelings so that they are a little bit less intense, or so they have a little bit less of a hold over us. So some different ways to say this are looking at thoughts rather than from them, or noticing thoughts instead of participating in them, or just letting thoughts come and go rather than holding on to them or trying to push them away. So here are some handy dandy specific ways that you can practice cognitive diffusion. One way is to externalize the voice. So if you have the thought, I'm going to fail, instead saying, I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. So creating a little bit of space, honoring, hey, this is just a thought. Maybe it's true, but maybe it's not. So giving yourself a little bit of time to question, that thought if you want to, or if that would be helpful. Another one, you can add in like a what if. So if you have the thought, I'm going to fail, you could say, what if I don't fail? Or what if I do fail? Creating some space for some alternative explanations that you can explore or play with. You could also say, like, what if I pass? Or what if I do really well? Really just kind of trying to interrupt that thought feeling like truth, or create a little bit of space. You can also name the story. So if all of these thoughts or feelings were put into a movie title, what would you call it? For example, the I'm going to fail story, or the no one likes me story. So being able to, again, label, oh, this is that thought again. This is that thought that tells me I'm going to fail. This is the, I'm trying to think of another example. This is the everyone's going to know I'm nervous story. If you've maybe got some anxiety about people knowing that you're nervous. You can type it out, imagining your thought on a computer screen, and then playing with it by changing the font, changing the color, changing the formatting. Just creating a little bit of space between you and the thought by manipulating it in some way. You can also imagine that your unhelpful thought is like a pop-up ad, and then you can practice just closing it. Or if you're like me, you always have like a million tabs open, either in your computer or in your phone. You can just imagine, okay, this thought is just another tab, and I'm just going to go ahead and close it and go back to the other one. You can also imagine that your thoughts are passengers on a bus. So imagine you're driving a bus, and you can treat difficult thoughts as like, annoying passengers. See if you can just keep driving, keep going through your day rather than stopping, when they want to or trying to kick them off. I'm just going to stay focused on driving, going through my day, and getting myself to the place that I want to be. And these are just thoughts. These are just people on the bus, and they're going to do their thing, and I don't have to intervene. I can just continue on my way. You can say it slowly. So either in your mind or out loud. You can say the thought in slow motion, just changing it in some way, and notice if your relationship to it changes. So if we go back to I'm going to fail, I could just really slow it down and be like, I'm going to fail. And I feel a little different about it now. Feels a little bit more silly to me, but you can see how it would feel for you. You can also imagine your thoughts as leaves on a stream, maybe like the river here in San Marcos. So if a thought pops up, just imagine it's just a leaf on the stream. It's gonna come by, it's gonna do its thing, and we are gonna watch from the riverbank rather than being in the river, being right in the middle of all those thoughts. You can also thank your mind. So if you have an unhelpful thought or an intrusive thought, you can say like, thanks for that, brain. After all, your brain really is just trying to help, but sometimes it doesn't do a great job helping. Another way of doing this that I have heard is someone once told me that they would imagine their thoughts as like a little lizard on their shoulder. You could change that. Maybe it's a bird, maybe it's a little raccoon or a mouse, I don't know. But she would imagine that there was a lizard on her shoulder, and when she would have an unhelpful thought, she would just kind of in her mind, turn to the lizard and say, thank you for that. And then she would feed it a grape and she would just go along with the rest of her day. Just kind of honoring, oh, okay, that was a thought. Thank you for trying to help, but I'm going to go on to something more important or more helpful. You can also write difficult thoughts on note cards or small pieces of paper and take them with you. It can kind of help you feel like you can carry them with you, like if you need or want to revisit those thoughts, but that you don't have to kind of keep them in your mind the whole time. You can kind of externalize them, put them outside of yourself on these note cards, and that you can still continue to carry them with you as you go about and control your daily life. So lots of examples there. And you get to experiment and see what works for you. There's no right or wrong way to deal with this. Whatever helps, I'm all for. So some things to avoid. So we talked about things we want to do, things we want to try. These are some things that you want to try to minimize if you can. So try not to act or engage with the intrusive thoughts. That can really just fuel them. Again, we're participating in them when we try to make them go away or change them. And we want to step back and watch them. We don't want to participate. Try not to judge yourself. It's very, very normal. Have some compassion for yourself if you can. You're in discomfort. You're having this thought you don't want to have. And that's hard. That really sucks. So try to be kind and compassionate with yourself and not judge your brain for just doing what brains sometimes do. Try not to obsess over why you're having them. Again, they probably don't have any secret meaning if they're an intrusive thought. It's just a thing that happened. You don't have to analyze and try to figure out where it's coming from or why it's happening. Sometimes therapy can be helpful for understanding maybe why they're happening a lot if you've got some anxiety or something else going on. But that's more about understanding why you're having intrusive thoughts, not what the thought specifically means about you, because most of the time it doesn't. Similarly, trying not to look for meaning behind them. They might mean that you're stressed out. They might mean that you're experiencing a little bit of anxiety, but the content of the thought itself probably doesn't mean anything. Try not to suppress them. Again, paradoxically, this usually makes it even worse. They can kind of come back just bigger and louder the more we try to push them away. Try not to check to see if something is working to get rid of them. Kind of just try the strategies, be gentle, be compassionate with yourself, and try not to check in too much to see if the thought has gone away. Just kind of, continue to go through your day and practice some of those strategies that we talked about. And try not to combat them with non-prescribed substances. So it's very common for folks to turn to alcohol or marijuana or other substances because it can feel like we get some relief from those thoughts. But in the long term, that's going to be less helpful typically than trying to cultivate some other strategies first. So when to reach out for help. So if you feel like acting on intrusive thoughts or really any thoughts in a way that could cause harm to you or someone else, seek support. So call 911, call any of the crisis lines that I mentioned earlier, call us. You can also always go to a local emergency room. If you notice thoughts that feel inconsistent with reality, like that, that you're being watched or that someone's planning to hurt you, and it feels irrational, it doesn't match up with what's happening, be sure to reach out and talk to someone about it. And then if intrusive thoughts, images, or memories regularly consume your energy, if they're really draining you, if they cause you a lot of distress, if they make it hard for you to live your daily life or do the things that you want to do, reach out for some support. It's not an uncommon concern to have. And sometimes just having some space to talk about it and problem solve your coping strategies can be all you need. And if there's additional steps that might be more helpful, continuing with therapy or thinking about medication or something like that, you've got lots of options, lots of opportunities to make a dent in what feels really distressing. All right, well, here are all of my sources. Now would be a great time if folks have any questions to push those towards the Q&A. Otherwise, we will start looking at wrapping up. All right, it looks like we got no questions here, which is absolutely okay. So again, I'm from the Counseling Center here at Texas State. Reach out if you've got questions or if you want some support or resources. We are here for you. Otherwise, thank y'all so much for being here today. I hope this was informational and helpful, and have a great rest of the semester. So one question, how can we see the presentation slides? So I'm not sure what the timeline is like, but this webinar will be uploaded to the Counseling Center website with all of our other past webinars. So you will be able to see the slides via that recording. All right, great question. Well, take care, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.